Alright, we are ready to begin our next unit. Our next unit deals with measurement, and more specifically, it deals with converting from one unit of measurement to another. Today's learning goal for this lesson is that students will be able to convert and compare customary units of length. Since this is a new unit, we're going to cover some of our new terminology in this lesson. First of all, what is a measurement? A measurement is a value that's used to represent the quantity of an object in the units used. Let's talk about that. The quantity of an object is how much. It could be the distance from one place to another. It could be how much it weighs. It could be how much space it takes up. But it's always a quantity. It's always a number that tells us how much of whatever we're trying to describe. And then the second part is that it always has units. So in our example, we have 15 miles. The 15 tells us the quantity, or how much, or how many. And then the miles tell us the unit that we're going to be using. The units are a standard means of measuring or labeling quantities. Standard means that they're the same. So if we measure 1 foot in Orlando, Florida, that's going to be the same thing as 1 foot in California. It's going to be the same thing as 1 foot in New York. It's going to be the same thing as 1 foot in Oregon. It's the same no matter where you go. And that's why it's important to have units, so that when we measure something, we're always talking about the same measurement. The next term we're going to talk about is precise. Sometimes you hear the word precision. And precise means how close a measurement is to actually measuring the value of the quantity of the object. So if we are measuring something that's 2 feet long, and we say, oh, it's about a yard. Well, that's not as precise as if we were to use the exact measurement and say that it's 12 feet. The important thing to note is that the more precise we want our measurement to be, we're going to try to use smaller units. So an inch is going to be more precise than a foot is going to be more precise than a yard, and a yard is going to be more precise than a mile. The next term we're going to use is dimensional analysis. And dimensional analysis is the method that we're going to use in order to convert from one type of unit to another type of unit. And what we need to do that are conversion factors. And we're going to talk about those when we start working some of our problems out. The next term is length. Length is simply the quantity from one point to another point on an object. It could be from the top of your head to the bottom of your feet, and that would measure your height. That's the length. It could be from one side of a desk to the other side of the desk. That could be the length of the desk. Another term that's very similar to length is distance. When we talk about distance, we're talking about the quantity from one point to another that's between objects. We could have a starting point and an ending point, and that space in between is the distance. And then our last term are our customary units of length, and you're probably very familiar with these anyways. They're the units that we use in the United States to measure length and distance, and the ones we're going to be using are inch, foot, yard, and mile. Alright, so in order to use our dimensional analysis, we already talked about we need to know our conversion factors. And so I've listed some of the important conversion factors here below. 1 foot is equal to 12 inches, 1 yard is equal to 3 feet, 1 yard is also equal to 36 inches, 1 mile is equal to 5,280 feet, and it's also equal to 1,760 yards. Go ahead and make note of these in your notes. You're going to be referring to them often as you work out problems. Alright, we're going to do some sample problems using dimensional analysis. It's a little bit different than the method that you've used in the past, but it really helps prevent you from making mistakes. It sets things up in a way that you always are going to get the correct answer, and I think that's what's important about this. The first sample problem that we're going to do is we're going to convert 3 miles into some number of feet. Alright, so we are going to use dimensional analysis in order to solve the problem. 3 miles equals some number of feet. The first thing that we're going to do is we need to come up with our conversion factor. And we see that we start with miles and we're moving to feet. So we're going to go through those conversion factors that we look for and look for the one that relates miles to feet. Well, if you look, you'll see there's one that says that 1 mile is equal to 5,280 feet. Now, we're going to set that up as a fraction using the number and the units, but we need to know which is going to be the numerator and which one's going to be the denominator. So there's two ways we could write that. We could write that as 1 mile as the numerator and 5,280 feet as the denominator, or we could write it as 5,280 feet as the numerator and 1 mile as the denominator. Well, we need to know which one of these we're going to use, and I'm going to show you the trick to that in a second. When we use dimensional analysis, we're going to think of this as a giant division problem. And so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to draw a fraction line. It's a long fraction line because we're going to have a lot of information on there. So the top part of that fraction line, that's going to be our numerator. The bottom part of that fraction line, that's going to be our denominator. The first thing we do in the very first part is we're going to write the information that they give us, the part that we start with. It says that we start off with 3 miles. And then we're going to draw a vertical line to separate the first section from the second section. Then we're going to take one of our conversion factors and we're going to put it into the second section. And the way that we pick which one of these we're going to choose from is we're going to choose the one that has whatever's in the numerator of the first section needs to be in the denominator of the second section. So if we have 3 miles in the top, we need to have the 1 mile on the bottom of that fraction line, which means that the 5,280 feet has to be on the top. So now we're going to simplify some of these things. One of the things that we know is if we have the same value on the top of our fraction line and the bottom of our fraction line, we know that we can cancel those out. Okay, that's because anything divided by itself equals 1. So if we have miles on the top and miles on the bottom, we can cancel them out because miles divided by miles equals 1. We also can cancel out any ones that we have because we know that if we multiply something by 1, it's going to have the same value. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply everything on the top times the next thing on the top, and we're going to multiply everything on the bottom times the next thing on the bottom. So we're going to do the top first. 3 times 5,280. Well, I can't do that in my head, so I'm going to write that down. 5,280 times 3, 0 and 24, 7, 8, and 15. So that's going to be 15,840. And then we multiply everything on the bottom. Well, nothing times 1 is 1. It's going to be 1. And then the units that we use are going to be the units that are left over. We've already canceled out the miles, so the only units that we have left are the feet. So this tells us that 3 miles is equal to 15,840 feet.